sometimes, and I want to honor both the joys and the sorrows that were shared in this space today. And I'm grateful to be able to be with you, having heard both of a birth and a death. And also, I want to let you know that there is now a broken glass and water spilled in this life is both whole and fragmented, and we never know what is going to happen. It's a great mystery. Whenever I speak in a UU congregation, I become very conscious of my words, because we are very conscious of the words we use in order to be welcoming to people of many different types of faith. And sometimes it can get a little bit relentless, and sometimes it even causes some awkwardness and self-consciousness because we're afraid of using the wrong words or offending someone. And so today I would like to share a poem by one of my favorite poets, Ada Limon, a Hispanic American woman from LA who went to school at the University of Washington in theater before becoming a poet, who now lives in Kentucky. And so in this poem you'll hear the landscape of that part of the country evoked as she talks about what it looks like to us and the words we use. All these great barns out here in the outskirts, black creosote boards knee-deep in the bluegrass. They look so artfully abandoned, even in use. You say they look like arks after the seas dried up. I say they look like pirate ships. And I think of that walk in my valley where Jay said, "You don't believe in God?" And I said, "No, I believe in this connection we all have to nature, to each other, and to the universe." And she said, "Yeah, God." And how we got there, low beasts among the white oaks, Spanish moss and spiderwebs, obsidian shards stuck in our pockets like glass, a woodpecker flurry, and I refused to call it so. So instead, we looked up at the unruly sky, its clouds in simple animal shapes we could name, though we knew they were really just clouds, disorderly and marvelous and ours. When you first invited me to speak here last fall, your reverence and respect for the trees and the forest outside of your sanctuary windows made a deep impression. And standing in the pulpit today, I feel their presence outside of these walls, witnessing our gathering today and every Sunday. I'm humbled by these elders who have seen generations of people living in this place before you, and who will also stand after you are gone. Some of these Douglas firs and maples are 80 to 100 years old. These elders have much to teach us about the transformation we experience through living in relationship to ourselves, and the way we talk to ourselves, in relationship to each other, and to all that is. In relationship, we learn about our wholeness, our beauty, and we also experience those moments of grace that allow us to accept our brokenness, our own inclinations towards violence and towards disrespect. When we've done something that feels too difficult to speak of. We can look to the trees and the forests for some solace and some inspiration, strength and acceptance and forgiveness. Among these beings who are alive with the spirit of life, look at the lushness of this green moss. Look at the lushness of the ferns. It is astonishing how much life is out there. This morning when I arrived, I went for a little walk in your memorial garden, and if you haven't been out there recently, you need to know that the salmon berries are blooming. And that color, that pink or magenta, or whatever you want to call it, is astonishing. How can you not feel the beauty of being alive? How can you not feel accepted for being who you are when you stand in front of that salmon berry, reflecting back to you? For my homily today, I'll be reading a piece written by Hermann Hesse together with some reflections of my own. Hesse was an early 20th century novelist and poet who was born in a forest, in the Black Forest of Germany. He became a seminarian, but then left higher education because he felt his passions were being suppressed by the religious teachings. And so he quite naturally ran into a field where he could use his hands, he could use his body. He apprenticed to a mechanic. And after becoming a mechanic, he became an antique bookseller. Logically. And after becoming a bookseller, he began finally to be able to successfully publish his writings. He emigrated to Switzerland and gave up his German citizenship in the 1920s. And during the Hitler years, he describes himself as engaging in shy protest against mass suggestion and violence by the fascist regime. However, as an author, as a poet, and a public figure, this open protest exposed him to continuous attacks and floods of abusive letters, as he writes. And so he retreated even further to a home provided to him by friends. As an artist, he was not wealthy, in the rural countryside, a countryside that I imagine maybe somewhat like this one. He received a Nobel Prize for Literature in 1946, and so he is among the ranks of the distinguished, like Wangari Maathai, who we just heard about earlier, who received a Nobel Peace Prize. So I'll begin with some words from Hesse's writings on trees, called Reflections and Poems. He writes, "For me, trees have always been the most penetrating creatures. I revere them when they live in tribes and families, in forests and groves, and even more I revere them when they stand alone. They are like lonely persons, not like hermits who have stolen away, but like great solitary people." And here you can see his heroes, he says, like Beethoven and Nietzsche. In their highest boughs, the world rustles. The roots of trees rest in infinity, but they do not lose themselves there. They struggle with all the force of their lives for one thing only: to fulfill themselves according to their own laws, to build up their own form, to represent themselves. When I read these words by Hesse, I have a question, a spiritual question. And that is, what is the heart of the matter to which Hesse's tree preachers are preaching? And what can we hear in their words? And I think for Hesse, the heart of the matter is this dance we do between our individual autonomy and participating in community and in relation to what is greater than us. And as we hold that tension, there are many voices who might weigh in on one side or the other. Hesse, of course, says he feels there's greater stateliness in the solitude and majesty of a lone tree. And certainly, who has not marveled at a great apple tree or a great Douglas fir growing alone with full branches in the sunshine? And yet that great tree is also vulnerable to windstorms, to lightning. That one tree alone may be struck down. Whereas trees growing in a forest protect each other. They stand beside and border each other so that when a gust of wind comes, it's distributed among the branches and the treetops, and they are more likely to stand tall for another generation. As a community, we provide each other with that kind of support and safety. And so as we encourage each other to engage in spiritual practices, which I'll be talking more about today, one of the ways in which we can help each other grow is to create spaces where we can experience this solitude together that Hesse speaks of, in which we also more fully become ourselves as individuals. One way to do this is to respect each other's integrity and begin to resist something that is very, very difficult. Giving advice. Giving advice or helping. And instead to stand or sit together and be present to another person, offering assistance when asked. We like to be helpful, that's why we gather. But one of my great lessons in this was from an elder congregant who used an electric scooter to get around. And we would sit outside drinking tea in the presence of the elder tree teachers. And I remember the first time we met, I rushed to her aid as she struggled to get up from her scooter to sit down in a seat at the table. And she stopped me in my tracks. And she said sharply, "You help me when I ask for it, and not before." And I was surprised. I did the wrong thing. I felt a little ashamed. And then I felt uncomfortable. Now what do I do? And so, fortunately, I sat down and waited as she got up from her scooter and she sat down at the table. And so that day I was taught how to respect her own autonomy and that she had all the resources that she needed and she very well intended to use them. And I could also trust then in that relationship that when she did ask me for assistance, I was truly being giving when I helped her and not exercising my own ego by invading her space with what was really my own need to be needed. This moment of correction and conflict led us into a deeper trust and a deeper sharing of the heart. And I missed her when she passed. When I feel that grief, I go to the trees and I ask, what do we really need? What kinds of resources do we really need? Hesse says, trees are sanctuaries. Whoever knows how to speak to them, whoever knows how to listen to them, can learn a truth. They do not preach principles. They preach, undeterred by particulars, an ancient law of life. A tree says, there is a kernel hidden in me, a spark, a thought. I am life from eternal life in the universe. The attempt and the risk that the eternal mother took with me is unique in the form and the veins of my skin, unique the smallest play of leaves in my branches and the smallest scar on my bark. I was made to reveal the eternal in my smallest special detail. A tree says, my strength is trust. I know nothing about my fathers. I know nothing about the 1,000 children that every year spring out of me. I live out the secret of my seed to the very end, and I care for nothing else. I trust. The spirit of life and love is in me. I trust that my labor is holy. Out of this trust, I live. When Hesse says that the trees speak of the ancient laws of life, I hear him speaking of that spark of the divine hidden in each of us. Those of you who do yoga, who say namaste at the end of your practice, that's what I hear in that word that comes to us from the East. I greet the spark of the divine within you. I hear Hesse saying that although the fruits of our labors are unknowable into the future, although we do not know the legacy that we will leave, that we create, we can trust that we are infused with a human spirit that requires our care to nourish and fan our inner flame like the light of a chalice. To believe this is what I think it means to be spiritual. And when we are spiritual, we also know, as the trees tell us, that our bodies, our forms, as well as the spirit that dwells within them, are unique and particular to us. And we can know our bodies somewhat, although it seems as we get older that we know them less and less. They become less predictable, perhaps. But how do we know what our spirit is? And how can we connect with the knowledge and wisdom we need in order to trust that our actions are in right relationship with that spirit? And when we come together as a body in a congregation, there's also a spirit that arises from within this body. Kitsap UU Fellowship feels like Kitsap UU Fellowship. It does not feel like another UU Fellowship somewhere else. It is unique to be here. These are very big questions of purpose. And so when I'm considering these questions, I know I need to engage in a practice, a spiritual practice, which for me is, as the topic today implies, the sacred art of log sitting. This is a deeply difficult, very esoteric, hard to understand practice. It involves going outside and sitting on a log. And if you don't have a log to sit on, I recommend the benches in the Memorial Garden. Or if you're someone who has an electric scooter or a wheelchair, you've got your own, very own log. And in your imagination, you can transform your seat. When we sit down on a log, on a tree that has died, an ancestor who has passed, where we can become conscious of our lineage, what came before us. For me, I also then begin to settle into what I am feeling, the weight of the unknowable, as I sink into my longing for understanding and for a vision larger than myself, a vision of a world made whole. At the same time, I also long for some illumining of some part of myself that will know what to do, what is my relationship in all of this. And as I sink into that, I remember, really, I have no idea. I am one small speck in a very large cosmos. I think that one of the most transformative phrases that a member of a powerful group of liberal, progressive people of faith can utter is, I don't know. I don't know. Hesse writes, when we are stricken by something and cannot bear a moment any longer, then a tree has to say to us, be still. Be still and look at me. Look at me. Life is not easy, but neither is it that difficult. Those are childlike thoughts. In my rings, you can see the narrow rings of years of scarcity and years of growth that are thicker, and yet each year is a ring. We live through it. The trees say, let the spirit of life and love speak within you, and your thoughts will grow silent. You are anxious because your path leads away from nurture, nourishment, safety, and home. But every step and every day will also lead you back again to the source of that nourishment. Home is neither here nor there. Home is within you, or home is nowhere at all. And here I think Hesse points us towards a deep wisdom. To be at home within ourselves is also simultaneously to know that we are homeless. Our search for truth and meaning engages both the comfort and security of an arrival, as well as the chaos and turbulence of travel through the unknown. As a spiritual home by nature, Unitarian Universalism is not a religion that deals in certainty. We deal with uncertainty. This is a reason why many of us refer to the unknowable as the great mystery. And in the face of this mystery, we are called to hold attention and a challenge, to sit with the discomfort of the unknown. And this is a real challenge. And sometimes we can react by becoming more controlling of what we can know. For example, when I read the poem earlier, we can become very focused on words and using the right words, especially in our social justice work. And sometimes those words, the right words, trying to nail them down, we avoid taking action. We avoid the risk of saying the wrong thing and showing up bravely in a conversation where we might slip and fall and break the glass. Or we refuse to acknowledge that what we have said is hurtful. In this way, we avoid those actions that might set us to wandering amidst the swirl of challenging and difficult emotions. Before we engage in this kind of work, I advocate that we engage a spiritual practice like log sitting in order to practice first allowing ourselves to feel how we feel, to feel discomfort. Hesse writes on wandering, he says, "A longing to wander tears my heart when I hear trees rustling in the wind at evening. If one listens to them silently for a long time, this longing reveals its kernel, its meaning. It's not so much a matter of escaping from one's suffering, though it may seem to be so. It is a longing for home, for a memory of the source of nourishment, for new metaphors for life. It leads home. Every path leads homeward." When we return each Sunday to our spiritual home, I think about what distinguishes us from those who practice on their own. When we join a faith community, what do we gain access to? And here I want to bring in the word discipline, spiritual discipline. This word discipline has a bad reputation these days, but what I mean simply is the act of holding ourselves accountable for showing up, just showing up, being in the grove with the other trees. And we show up every time with our chaotic feelings. The times when we come in and someone asks us, "How are we doing?" We say, "Fine." We don't really want to talk about it. Sometimes we come in and everything is great, it's so amazing, and then we realize someone else is having a bad day and we feel a little guilty for our great enthusiasm. Whatever it is, still, in community, no one can listen to us vent or share forever. So one of the first things we need to learn in order to grow together spiritually is to make a space inside, a space for wonder, for curiosity, for all that we feel. For myself, I seek out a park in Seattle, Seward Park, which is an oasis of wild community in the middle of the urban environment. When I go out on this land, I find myself in the presence of the grandmothers and grandfathers, stately cedars and firs, mossy maples. The trees there are in the presence of their ancestors on the forest floor, nourishing and birthing the next generation of saplings. Held by the lineage of trees, I feel reconnected and renewed, imagining and sensing the deep time of my forest relatives. There, amongst the leaf litter, I see I'm also surrounded by squirrels scurrying about, dropping cones, and looking around before they explode into movement again. They remind me of the pace of an urban life, the daily hurry up and wait of squirrel time. I go to the trees to ask the questions that arise out of my open heart, within the stillness. What is the work that is mine to do in healing the collective heart of our culture? How will I replenish myself and renew day after day in this work? However you ask, I encourage you to take some time to find a space of stillness, to find a log where you can wait and breathe and watch those feelings swirl down into the quiet, holding the questions open, staying with the uncertainty, staying with curiosity. In closing, Hesse writes, "So the trees rustle in the evening when we stand uneasy before our thoughts. Trees have long thoughts, long breathing and restful, just as they have longer lives than ours. They are wiser than we are as long as we do not listen to them. But when we have learned how to listen to trees, then the brevity, the quickness, the childlike hastiness of our own thoughts achieve an incomparable joy. Whoever has learned how to listen to trees no longer wants to be a tree. That person wants to be nothing except what they are. That is home. That is happiness. Blessed be." Spirit of life and love be with you now in this moment, today, and in the days to come. Blessed be. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.